Hey, what up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here with the review of tonight's WWE Network exclusive show, a part of the Undertaker week, which was JBL. Legends with JBL. Of course, he had a wrestling roundtable tonight, which was Stone Cold Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, and Triple H. Honestly, I thought this was a very, very good show. But honestly, when the 30 minutes was up and the show was over, I honestly threw my pen because I thought this was going to be an hour-long show. I thought we were going to be seeing a lot more of this, and JBL was the host. He was trying to steer the conversation, but at the same time, he was adding just as much in. He wasn't like he was interviewing these three guys. He was just trying to point them in there, and as they were talking about things that happened in their career, he was adding in things. I don't understand why this just wasn't, a wrestling roundtable. The JBL show, when he had Eric Bischoff on, was a very, very good show. I thought that them two having a one-on-one conversation, but honestly, when JBL's trying to talk to guys and trying to steer a conversation with everybody trying to get their own words and having so many people there, it was hard to do. And especially for them to fit this into a 30-minute episode, very, very tough. But a very, very fun show. Basically, they were talking about the career of The Undertaker, and they were talking about, when they were all coming up together, these are guys that were in the locker room. They were all leaders of their locker room. Of course, Triple H wouldn't really become. Well, I guess you can say he was, because Undertaker's been on top the whole time. But I was sort of thinking that Triple H sort of had to wait a little bit longer to become that main event guy. But he was on top for a good little while. But these were all guys that would sit in the locker room and knew that they were the reason why people were coming to the show. They were the reason why WWF was the top promotion. And, they'd always make jokes about them, about who was going to last the longest. And Stone Cold Steve Austin says that, the Undertaker's still here wrestling today, going on his 25-year anniversary. And he made it 13 years longer than Stone Cold Steve Austin did, who retired after WrestleMania 19, way back in, I guess that was 2003. But definitely they talk about the debut of The Undertaker at Survivor Series 1990, when he came out with Brother Love, and of course he was brought in by the $1 Million Man. And they talk about how everybody knew that this was going to be one hell of an angle, this was one hell of a character that Undertaker was going to be doing, but nobody really thought that it was going to last all that long, because how much stuff could you really do with the dead man? Basically, Undertaker was on a fast track. He came in within 1 year. He was main eventing Survivor Series 1991, going after the championship against Hulk Hogan. He is the guy who beat Hulkamania with the outside interference of Ric Flair, which would set up I thought at the time he was trying to set up Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, a match that never happened in WWF. We would have to wait until both of the guys would go to WCW. But this was just a fast track, a back-to-back pay-per-view. I believe that the pay-per-view was on a Sunday. I'm not 100% sure. It might have been on a Saturday. And then they did a pay-per-view almost exactly right after that on Tuesday. Barely any time in between it. It was a sort of a trial and error by Vince McMahon to see how much people would do it. The Survivor Series was the main pay-per-view. I bet it was $30. But they did the Tuesday in Texas show, trying to see if Hulk Hogan losing and Undertaker being the champion would drive people to pay another $20. The people that bought Survivor Series more than likely would want closure on what had happened at Survivor Series. They would pay for it. But for the people who didn't buy Survivor Series, would they turn around and buy the Tuesday in Texas pay-per-view because of the fact that they were shocked that they missed Hulk Hogan losing? They're definitely not going to miss the rematch to see what would happen from there. Hogan, of course, would beat Undertaker. They wouldn't have another match probably until 2002, when Hogan came back, and Hogan would drop a championship to Undertaker after his 1 month run as being the champion on top, which was a disaster in its own right. But we never got the Hogan Flair match. We never got the Undertaker versus Hogan match. So all in all, it was basically just a trial to see if that Tuesday in Texas would work. And Vince would go back to the Tuesday pay-per-views for the Cyber Sundays and Taboo Tuesday, not Taboo Tuesdays. What were they called? He had a pay-per-view on Tuesday, and I can't remember what the fuck those things were called. It wasn't Cyber Sundays, but it was the people voted on what they wanted to see, because I remember like Triple H was begging people to vote to put him and Ric Flair into a steel cage match. But it is what it is. We'll move on from there. But I love those voting pay-per-view shows for when they had them. They go over the fact that the Undertaker character, they really knocked it out of the park. They probably could have given that character to 1,000 other wrestlers, and 1,000 other wrestlers wouldn't have been able to pull off what he did. They gave Undertaker props on, in that 1990 to 1991, when, wrestling was starting to turn around, when you had Hulk Hogan leaving the WWF, and you had Shawn Michaels and you had Bret Hart on the rise. So many of the wrestlers were trying to go faster, trying to sort of change the pace of wrestling. Undertaker would have that slow walk to the ring. He would have that slow moves throughout his moveset. He really wasn't turning it up, and that's what sort of made him different than everybody else that was on the roster and sort of set him apart from what else was going on. They tell a story, JBL does, of a story that I'd never heard of, that basically Undertaker coming and being the Undertaker in WWF almost never happened. During Undertaker's last match, which was WCW, Undertaker, his hip popped out of place, and as everybody knows, Undertaker is like a gamer, and he's a guy that really comes to play. If he's booked for a match, he's going to go into it, and he wrestled that last WCW match with his hip out of place. Vince, who saw this last match before the fact that Undertaker came in for an interview, basically thought that Undertaker was a guy that had a whole lot of size, he had a great look, but because the hip was out of place, thought that was a guy that couldn't move within the ring. Undertaker came in, he thought he had a good meeting with Vince McMahon, even though the doubt was in the back of his mind that he wasn't going to be able to pull this off. Undertaker goes and gives his notice to WCW that he's leaving the territory, and little did he know that Vince McMahon almost really didn't hire him, and it ended up being Bruce Pritchard who talked him into being able to do it. I don't know if he had the inside track on knowing what had happened, but Undertaker got to be Undertaker, and he got to come in. One of the things that talked about the Undertaker more than anything else is how loyal he is to Vince McMahon. When he made the jump in 1990 to come to WWF, he's been there longer than longer than anybody else. Anybody else that's been there for any period of time, close to him would have to be a guy like Mark Henry, who didn't come in until like 1996. Kane would come in somewhere around that time as well. So, Undertaker has the longest reigning, WWE wrestler in by far. But definitely they tell a story of Kevin Nash calling to see if there was interest for Undertaker to switch sides. I've heard Kevin Nash talk about I don't know how to say this, but I didn't know that Kevin Nash was the guy that was honestly making the phone calls to The Undertaker. But during shoot interviews with Kevin Nash, I've heard Kevin Nash mention to the fact that, when Undertaker switched his gimmick from being the dead man and switching over and becoming the biker, that was mainly because if WCW was the call, he could show up on WCW, riding a motorcycle, having the biker's gear. They can call him whatever they need to call him. He can't take the name, but it's hard for Undertaker to come to WCW wrestling as the dead man and then try to figure out what was going on. So by him reinventing himself, it would be good for him if WCW was the call, but I'm sure that definitely Vince had him on lockdown, and there was probably double intentions from Kevin Nash. Sure, if Undertaker does make the switch, that's a game changer. One of the main guys at WWF coming to WCW, that's going to be a lot of interest coming with it. But definitely, when Kevin Nash and Scott Hall signed their contract, one of the best things that they had included in there is that basically, if anybody came to WCW and signed a contract larger than theirs, their contract would automatically be bumped up to the fact that they're getting paid the same thing as somebody else was getting paid. I can't remember if this was besides for Hulk Hogan, or if this was them getting the same money as Hulk Hogan, but Nash and Hall cleaned up in WCW. They made a ton of money when they were there, and definitely they talk about that's one of the reasons why they really pitched for Bischoff to bring in Bret Hart, because of the fact that if Bret Hart got signed, Bret Hart would get signed to a large deal, Nash and Hall would get the bump in pay, and they'd be wrestling doing the same thing that they were doing, but for the fact that they gave that thing in their contract, they would get a raise as well. They talk about the fact of Undertaker wrestling the last match of Shawn Michaels' career. They asked Shawn if he got to pick the opponent, and he said that he didn't. Basically, it was just the way that things panned out. They went out, they had a great match at WrestleMania 25. Michael Hayes thought it would be a great idea to have the rematch at WrestleMania 26. Shawn was already thinking of retiring, so basically he just said to make it a career match, and that's what they went out and did. And I think people didn't think that 26 was going to be able to live up to 25. They definitely got the main event spot, which they talked about the fact that at 25, that's one of the things that made the match so much better, is because Undertaker really gives it his all when he gets all fired up. And Undertaker, definitely, you guys have heard the stories about WrestleMania 23 when he had the match against Batista. Batista and Undertaker both thought that they should have had the main event spot that year, which ended up going to Cena and Shawn Michaels, which you could say wasn't the right move. But definitely when Batista and Undertaker came through the curtain after the match, they yelled at everybody to follow that. It wasn't just to Vince McMahon. It wasn't just to the writers and the guys that put the show together. It was to the roster that they thought they deserved to be there. And when Undertaker and Shawn Michaels were told they were going to be 5th at WrestleMania 25, they sort of took that as a knock, and they didn't want to do that. It is what it was. Triple H talks about the fact that he was going to be wrestling against Randy Orton that night, and he knew right off the bat that he was getting screwed. He said as the match was going on, he walked into the trainer's room and grabbed some tape to tape his fingers and his wrists and things like that. And he said he sat there. It was only supposed to be a minute trip into the trainer room, and he ended up sitting there watching 15 minutes of the match. And then immediately after the match was over, he knew that he was screwed. But because of the fact that he saw one of the best wrestling matches of his life of being a wrestling fan, he felt good for the business, but at the same time, he just knew that for him and Orton, there was nothing they could do to save that match at WrestleMania 25. I'm guessing that a lot like the Eric Bischoff interview with the JBL, that we're going to see part 2 on Thursday after SmackDown. So we'll be sitting around and waiting on that, and hopefully it's going to be a good one, and I'll see you guys down the road. Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here. Last night I was able to come home and watch the JBL Legends show on the WWE Network as a part of Undertaker Week. He had a huge stacked guest list of Stone Cold Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, and Triple H. This is a part of Undertaker Week. They were talking all about Undertaker. I thought it was a very good show. But at the end of the show, I was upset. I actually took this pen and I threw it across the room because of the fact that I thought it was going to be an hour-long show, and I didn't want it to end because of how good it was and how, mainly because there was 3 guests and JBL talking, it was so jumbled together that we didn't get as much out of there. If they wanted to talk about, Undertaker and have it be Undertaker Week, JBL should have done a show with Shawn, he should have done a show with Triple H, and he should have done a show with Shawn Michaels, talking all about all of the moments that they shared going on the road, because there's 3 guys all telling stories and all telling stories about the same thing. When you really break it down, you really didn't get that much from each guy that's there. It's almost like they were wasted having all 3 of these mega guests on the show at one time. But the show ended, and I honestly thought we weren't going to get part 2 until after SmackDown on Thursday, because that's what they did with the Eric Bischoff interview. They split it into 2 episodes, and they tried to make it where people would go after Raw and after SmackDown, and it makes sense. But this morning, I went to my comments on my video that I put up last night with my review of the show, talking about everything that went down, and somebody said that, hey, either they messed up or one thing leads to another. Part 2 is already up on the WWE Network in the on-demand section, so today, after dropping the kids off at work, or I guess, hey man, they can go out and make a buck and let them go do it, but they went out to school. I came home, I flipped it on, and boom, there it was. I started watching it. It was a good episode. This one talked a lot about ribs on Undertaker, on him on the road, portraying this character 24/7 whenever needed. We talked about his backstage leadership role, and they talked about the fact of what is going to come the day that Undertaker doesn't wrestle anymore. What is when is that day going to come, and what does that mean for the WWE? Undertaker was a guy that once he took this gimmick in 1990. You know, they talked about in the first part that, you know, 1,000 guys could have portrayed this character, and nobody would have been able to make this work. This was something that the guys all thought was a great, you know, gimmick, but when it all came down to it, they didn't think this gimmick was going to have a whole lot of legs to it. They thought that it was going to have a 1 year, maybe 2 year shelf, and then Undertaker would have to be repackaged or sent somewhere else, because, you know, how much stuff are you really going to be able to do with a dead man? And here we are 25 years later. But, you know, Undertaker was one of these guys that really took his character and he really took it seriously. When he got it into the ring, he never broke, and that was one of the games that Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Steve Austin would all take with him, was trying to get this guy to break. He just would always play to it. And they talk about the fact of, you know, they went to Kuwait and they were wrestling on these Kuwaiti shows, and everybody's having a brawl outside of the ring, and everybody's trying to fight, and there comes to a point where Undertaker gets hit by Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Undertaker does the hair flip, and when he did the hair flip and he came up with the eyes rolled back, Stone Cold Steve Austin didn't know what to do. He said he probably was hungover and just not really into what was going on, and he just laughed in Undertaker's face, and that made Undertaker break, and that's the only time that Stone Cold Steve Austin said that he's ever been able to do it. There's been talks of, they show it on the Raw after the show, where they just showed backstage, or not backstage, but in the ring moments of after the show ended, but, you know, trying to, you know, send the crowd home with something special that they don't get to see on TV. And they had Booker T, and they had, you know, Vince McMahon trying to get Undertaker to do the Taker-Rooney. Triple H, who was a heel at the time, he came down, and he was the guy working with Undertaker. And, you know, Undertaker's thinking that Triple H is coming down to, you know, either, you know, start a fight or get something going to get Undertaker out of the ring, where he doesn't have to just walk out on everybody. But Triple H gets into the ring for portraying a babyface, pretty much, trying to get Taker to do the Taker-Rooney. And Undertaker just looks at him and just says, "You too?" And he really can't believe that that's something that they would all try to get him to break. And one thing leads to another. They end up chasing Triple H out of the ring. Vince McMahon looks on like he couldn't believe that he wasn't able to get Taker to break. And it just was something that, you know, these guys are on the road, you know, for, you know, 2 months straight or however long it's going to be. And if it's something as small as trying to get Undertaker to break into the ring to get them, you know, to get in the car and drive to the next town and get the next show going, you know, it's something that everybody was trying to do. JBL talks about how he used to close out SmackDown shows as the champion, and it was like a whole company-wide thing, trying to get Undertaker to break, where everybody was feeding him jokes to give to Undertaker before he would, you know, take the last ride in the tombstone and try and get him to break. And JBL says that he was never able to do it. They tell the story about Undertaker being backstage and just having a bad day, and he needed somewhere to go and basically lay down and take a nap, and nobody was going to fuck with him. So he went, and he actually laid in one of his coffins. And, you know, basically, you know, as they got closer to showtime, Undertaker was getting out of the casket, and there's people that had gathered around. They didn't say if it was workers or if it was, you know, marks, or if it was just backstage personnel people. But they said that Undertaker just sat up in the coffin just like he does in the ring, got out of the coffin and just walked off as if nothing happened, as if it was an everyday occurrence that the Undertaker took naps in his coffin. They talked about, you know, basically because of him being a leader in the backstage, he didn't want to take any time off. They talk about the fact that in the early 90s, when Undertaker wrestled with the purple mask on his face, it was because he had broken an eye socket, and he didn't want to take any time off. He wanted to work through any injury that he had. They talk about in 2010, him breaking his eye socket once again, but still being able to go out there and wrestle. At the Elimination Chamber in 2010, there was a problem with the pyrotechnics, and as Undertaker was coming out for the Elimination Chamber match itself, the pyro went off as Undertaker was standing in it, and he suffered all of these burns. You can sort of see this if you go back and watch this on the documentary. They try their best to edit the most of it out, but you can see Undertaker trying to put out the flames on his jacket as he's making his way down to the ring, but he still gets into the chamber, and you can see the spots where he's burned, and he played such a pivotal part of that chamber match that he had to do it. He had to be a part of it. There was no way to save this and let's do it on Monday Night Raw or do it on SmackDown. he had to be in that chamber, and he had to wrestle all the way to the end in order for, Shawn Michaels to come out from underneath, and for Shawn Michaels to cost Undertaker the championship to set up the rematch for WrestleMania 26. And there's not many other guys that are going to take burns like that. I mean, Triple H came out and the dry ice burned him for WrestleMania 29. You can look at Brock Lesnar looking at him like, what the fuck is going on? As he gets into the ring, and you can see that, Triple H's abdomen is just completely tore up. He's trying to dump water on top of it to stop the burning thing, which you can tell it just probably made it burn 10 times more. In the backstage, Taker was the backstage guy. He was also one of the smartest guys. Triple H tells the story on his Triple H Thy Kingdom Come DVD of, basically when him and Stephanie were trying to heat up and they were becoming a real item. Triple H pulls Taker aside. They have lunch in a hotel, restaurant. He said it was probably a Fridays or something like that. And he basically laid it out. This is what's going on. What do you think's going to happen? And Undertaker didn't tell him, you'll go get him, it's a girl, if you love her, whatever. Basically put it out there on the table the way it really is. I mean, you're messing with the boss's daughter. If anything goes wrong in this and you guys, don't see eye to eye and you break up, there's going to come, where Vince has to choose his daughter, or he's going to have to choose you, and he's going to choose Stephanie. You're probably going to lose your job. You're probably going to lose your spot. And as of at that time, there was nowhere else for him to go. There was no WCW. There was no ECW. If it was at the right time period, there's no even, TNA. So, he was risking everything, and, Triple H and Stephanie still ended up going through with it and thinking that, they had the right thing to do. Taker and Vince had a meeting the next day in Ottawa after the Montreal Screwjob, where basically Taker left Montreal. He showed up to Monday Night Raw the next week, and he was the guy that went into the room for the boys and talked to him first. Shawn Michaels says that he went into the building to talk to Vince that day, and everybody told him to stop. Taker was in the meeting with him already, so Shawn hung out in the hallway and he waited for Taker to come out. Taker immediately walked right up to Shawn, shook his hand, and basically said, hey, we got no heat here. You did what you had to do, and that was it. Taker went walking off down the hall. Shawn's never asked Vince. He's never asked Taker about what was said in that room. Triple H says he's not 100% sure, but basically thinks that Vince just laid it out on the table, just told him what what Brett wanted to do, what Vince wanted to do. Vince had to make sure that at Survivor Series there was a new champion because he didn't want Brett to go to WCW, who he was already under contract with the championship belt, and be able to hurt the company. So he was the guy who became the locker room leader, even though there were problems along the way. They talk about El Gigante at WrestleMania 9, where they made a bet that none of them were. Well, Shawn was in the company, but Shawn didn't speak up. But Stone Cold Steve Austin and Triple H, neither were with the company at the time. Neither of them thought that, Undertaker was complaining in the locker room about having to wrestle this guy. He just went out there. He tried to find a way to make it work, and they just went on from there. They talked about the fact of Wrestler's Court. This is something as wrestling fans we've never been able to see the inside of this. We've heard about it in a lot of shoot interviews, and we try to picture what's going on with Undertaker being the judge. You've got the Godfather as the bailiff. You've got JBL as the defense attorney. I'm not sure who the prosecutor is, but everybody's trying to put a case on somebody. And this was something that brought people together. It was about trying to show the young guys what it took to be a wrestler in the ring, out of the ring, in the public's eye. I mean, they talk about the fact of Teddy Long being too cheap. I don't know if this means he's not, tipping people at the airport or, things that he's supposed to do. But, because of the fact that the APA put Teddy Long on the stand, this had younger guys that were in the locker room seeing what it took to be a wrestler 24/7. They told a story that I had never heard of before, basically about wrestling over in Europe at Insurrection, where Stone Cold Steve Austin came down and his knee brace caught the Undertaker's ear and actually sort of ripped it off, like Mick Foley's ear. And basically because there was a ordinance in England, I think they called it a curfew. You couldn't leave. So basically, Triple H, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Undertaker, who wrestled in the three-way main event, they basically just had to, shower in the sink real fast, throw some clothes on, and jump into the airplane. Undertaker, who had his ear ripped off, actually had to have a plastic surgeon meet him at the airport and get on the airplane with him and actually put the ear back onto his head during the flight, where he was coming in and out of consciousness. And as he came out of consciousness at one point, Kurt Angle and Vince McMahon were wrestling around. This is when they fly those big jumbo jets because they have to have room for the ring and everything inside of there. Sees that Vince and Angle are over there just messing around. He comes over and just puts a hold on Angle. Angle drops. He knocks him out. And it's on from there. They talk about the fact that the streak ending at WrestleMania 30. Undertaker says that he doesn't remember anything from 3:30 in the afternoon until 4:30 in the morning the next day. Stone Cold Steve Austin says that's great because he talked to Undertaker right before he walked out to the ring and he gave him a shameless plug about trying to get him to do the podcast. Undertaker said that he would do it, but he hasn't done it to this point. Here we are almost 2 years later down the road, and we're still waiting for that. But Stone Cold Steve Austin seems sort of embarrassed by this at one point. Stone Cold said that he had a beer in each hand. He was watching it in the production truck. Shawn Michaels says that he was watching it with Triple H. Nobody knew what was going to happen. Everybody was shocked. People said that there was no way in the world that Taker would ever lose at WrestleMania, and it really happened. Triple H says at WrestleMania 17, when they were, laying out their match, no one ever had talk of what the streak was. They just knew that Taker was always going to win at WrestleMania. I think it was WrestleMania 18 after Taker beat Flair. I think he held up 10 fingers, symbolizing that was 10 wins in a row at WrestleMania. I don't know what's going to ever happen when Undertaker retires, but I would want it to be something like the end of the Poltergeist, where just the house blows up. I don't want any thought of Undertaker ever coming back. I just want us all to know. I don't want him to say it. I want it to happen. I don't know if he dies or he gets sent up to the top of the arena, much like the Royal Rumble back in the day after he lost to Yokozuna, but it's going to be a sad day. This was fun. I want to see more of the Legends with JBLs, but I wanted it to be solo shows with just one guy.